we're going to do is we're going to also record the audio. Bernard, I need to talk to you, get some advice, but we're going to download the audio so that you guys can upload it as a podcast, so that it makes you don't have to sit down in front of the TV or a computer screen to watch it. You can listen while you're on the train or on the beach in some people's cases. Yeah. So I'm going to hand over. I'll hand over to you, Nicola, please.
No worries. Have you managed to let in Sarah and Henriette yet?
I'm here.
Oh, you are. Oh, sorry. I haven't got it on the gallery.
I've seen Henriette as well.
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect. I was just checking that you're all there. Perfect. Well, it's lovely to be here. Lovely to see you all. Thanks so much for inviting us along, Simone, to do this little Q&A session. We're going to talk for approximately 25-30 minutes at the beginning, just to give you guys a bit of an overview of topics that that we're seeing come up regularly with clients and through Audio UK members as well. And then hopefully that will give you some food for thought for some questions, or if you've got other kind of related questions, then feel free to ask those as well. But we'll talk first, and then we'll have a look in the chat and see if there's questions there, or if you just want to unmute yourselves and ask us a question at the end, then feel free to do that as well. Perfect. Okay, so just a little bit on Mint & Co. So I set up Mint & Co in 2016 now, and believe it or not, we were actually remote working right from the beginning, even though everyone's joined our world now. It was quite kind of new at the time, and that was a big part of our USP, was that we wanted our consultant team to be able to work flexibly and remotely around families or other obligations or passions of theirs. And on the client side, I set up with the aim that we were going to provide cost-effective and accessible support for our clients as well in the creative industries. So yes, I'm going to talk to you alongside my colleagues Sarah and Henriette, and so we will get going. I'm just going to share my screen, and am I allowed to do that? Simone, is that all set up?
Yeah, you have access to it. Yeah, there you go.
Brilliant. Okay, okie dokie. Oh, it won't let me move the slides. Hold on one second. Oh, there we go. That's better. Perfect. So Sarah is going to make a start on key production agreements and some holdback information.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. As Nick says, my name's Sarah, and these are the topics I'm going to be talking to you about. Starting with key production agreements, rather than just running through a list of the key production agreements that you might be entering into, I just want to focus on at what stage in the production process you should be thinking about entering into certain agreements. At pre-commission stage, you may be developing content by way of research or pitch materials or a sizzle tape, and you may have a development. You may have a commissioner on board who commissions development, or you may have a financier who is commissioning, who's advancing you funds to pay for that development work. So at that stage, you'll be considering entering into both either a development agreement or a finance agreement, and that will include discussions on the rights of that party in the event you get a commission, and also entitlement to further revenue shares should that content be commissioned and subsequently exploited. Another set of agreements you should probably be looking at pre-commission stage is rights and option agreements. So if your development work is based on a third-party work, such as a book or a piece of artwork, then you should be looking at entering into an agreement with the rights holder of that work to firstly attach that work to your pitch materials, but also an agreement from that rights holder that you can go on and include that work as part of your commissioned content, which will include an element of exclusivity for you, so you have assurance that there's no other producer pitching the similar or the same piece of work to another broadcaster. It's really key to consider these agreements at pre-commission stage. We often see producers coming to us at commission stage wanting to tie up these rights because the commissioning party expect these agreements to be in place, and a lot of development work might have been done with this third party rights holder, but no discussion has taken place yet as to the fees or the rights involved and subsequent uses of that work within your content. This can be quite stressful at commissioning stage, as mentioned, because the commissioning broadcaster will expect this to be in place at the point in commissioning your content. So it's really important at pre-commission stage that if you're using anyone else's work, it's key to your development that you enter into those discussions and potentially a written form of agreement at this stage. At pre-production stage, you're obviously going to be entering into your commissioning agreement and potentially a co-production agreement should you have another co-producing party involved. A co-production agreement should clearly set out the roles and responsibilities of both parties, as well as the share of copyright each party will take, and the entitlement to production fees and net receipts in the event of exploitation. At production stage, you will be entering into agreements to give you consent from all those parties that are contributing to your content. This will be your contributors, your on-screen contributors, presenters, right holders, and rights holders such as people providing or owners providing third-party materials like a book, or if your work's based on book, or stills, archive, music, etc. Those kind of materials. The general rule of thumb is if somebody else is contributing in any way by providing material or their services to your content, you need to get consent. Usually that's in writing by way of a release form or a contract. In some circumstances, such as if you're filming in public, a filming notice might be sufficient. And obviously there are a few limited exceptions, such as fair use and material that might be out of copyright. The general rule of thumb is get consent in written form. Finally, just moving on to distribution stage. So once you produce your program, it's out there. If you have a distributor, you'll be looking at entering into a distribution agreement. I'm moving on to subsequently talk about holdbacks, but just to mention this in the context of distribution agreements, any distribution rights a distributor has must dovetail those of the original commissioning party. So their rights take precedent, and the distributor can only distribute those rights, their rights, after any exclusivity periods or holdbacks that your initial commissioning broadcaster has in respect to your content. So that's kind of just an overview of what to think about at various stages. I'm just going to focus a little bit on presenter agreements. We draft a lot of presenter agreements, and these are just a few tips that we've picked up over the years when producers have come to us to discuss various matters. If your development work has a key presenter attached that is integral to your pitch and potential success for commission, you may want to, excuse me, you may want to enter into an attachment agreement at pre-commission stage. And what this will do is allow you to attach that presenter to your pitch materials with the confidence to know that if you're subsequently commissioned to produce that material, that content, the presenter will have promised to provide their presenter services to your content. It can be quite valuable at pitch stage to know, for the broadcaster to know that that's in place. When talking to a presenter or their agent when you're negotiating a fee, it's key to think about what the broadcaster expects from your presenter. Now, broadcasters generally require all presenters to be bought out on all rights basis. They may have additional expectations in respect to in-person or social media promo. There may also be additional clauses within the terms of your commissioning agreement that the broadcaster expects to be replicated in your presenter agreement. So you just need to watch out for those. I think what's key for your discussions with the presenter or their agent at fee stage is to ensure that the party knows that what fee you're offering is in consideration of a full buyout of all rights. I had an example recently of a producer who came to me for a presenter agreement, and they'd already started filming and they'd agreed a fee, but they'd never had any discussions about rights. And the assumption for the producer was that they'd be bought out. The assumption from the agent was that the rights would be limited just to the use of the initial broadcaster. And this puts at a tricky situation, and with very low bargaining power, particularly when filming has started. And in this case, whilst we were able to get all the rights that the original broadcaster needed so that the producer was not in breach of contract, it did pose an issue because some of the further exploitation rights had to be limited. So it's much better to ensure that either whoever's engaging talent, whether it be a booker or another member on your production team, are specifying upfront what your fee is buying, both in terms of filming days and publicity days maybe, but also in terms of rights. So specifying the fees in consideration for a full buyout of all rights in respect to their contribution to your programme. Two further points which really were discussed at drafting stage, which I would discuss with a producer if I had an instruction to draft a presenter agreement, is whether it would be appropriate to agree that the presenter doesn't provide their services to a competing party or to a competing programme, sorry, for a period after your transmission, just to protect your content. This may be something that's discussed by the broadcaster, or it may be something that you should just request off your own back. This period during which you have exclusivity over your programme and similar programmes usually lasts around the period during which the original broadcaster has the right to recommission your content. And tied into this is again, for a discussion between your business affairs advisor and the producer, is whether it's appropriate to include a clause whereby the presenter's tied to presenting the second series. So there's an agreement in the first series that if you're commissioned to produce a second series, they will again provide their services on the same terms. And then that gives you the continuity for your series in respect to your host, your presenter of that content. So that's just a few observations that we thought might be useful to pass on in respect to presenter agreements. So moving on to holdbacks within commissioning agreements, we're going to talk generally about what to expect. Obviously, there are variations across broadcasters, and sometimes there is room for negotiation depending on the broadcaster and the content involved. But generally, in respect to BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5 commissions, the broadcaster takes an exclusive licence in the UK for 3 to 5 years. Now, in respect to UK secondary, these rights are released earlier from that licence period. So a producer can exploit UK secondary rights during their exclusive licence period, subject to a holdback, which again depends on the broadcaster. Some broadcasters have a published release policy. Other broadcasters include those early release terms within their general terms of commissioning. That's in respect to the UK. In respect to the rest of the world, your general rights as a producer, also your rights as a producer generally are that you can exploit your content after the original broadcaster has had their world premiere. So the day after the first transmission of the last episode, you can then exploit that content outside of the UK and ERA. This doesn't mean you can't enter into discussions and agreements with a distributor prior to that time. It just means that any transmission outside the UK has to wait for that first transmission of the last episode by your original broadcaster, your commissioning broadcaster. In respect to format rights in the UK, these are usually subject to a holdback placed on the commissioning broadcast on the producer, equivalent to their recommissioning period plus an additional period of time, which is usually about 12 months. So, for example, if you look at the BBC terms, the BBC say that producers can't exploit their format rights in the content for a period of 9 months from first transmission of last episode, which is their recommissioning period, plus an additional 12 months. The other broadcasters, the holdback terms vary significantly. So I'm just going to run through a few examples. For a Sky commission, Sky take copyright of your programme generally, and if there's a producer format, the producer retains the format, but distribution rights in the programme are owned by Sky. So rather than having a holdback provision, you are licensed those rights, just some distribution rights outside of the Sky territory for a period of 10 years, which starts 30 days after their world premiere of their programme. So it's a slightly different structure for Sky. And again, for YouTube, a very different structure whereby producer retains copyright, but YouTube take an exclusive world license in your content for initial period of 7 years, which is extendable, I think, up to about 13 if they exercise all their the further cycle options. And during that period, you can't develop any content based on that original program or produce any content or exploit it until after that license period ends, at which point you're free to exploit and you don't have any obligation for net receipts back to YouTube at that stage. Looking at all four, again, slightly different structure, whereby they take a 3-year license in the UK in respect to your content, although that may be worldwide if it's short form. But in respect to the format, you can exploit outside of the UK after this first world premiere, so the first transmission of last episode. In respect to in the UK, that period is extended by a further 12 months. What's key to remember, though, is that after expiry of those holdback periods, all four retain a right of first look for further 12 months, which means they have the first look to recommission further series and to buy in any ex-UK versions produced based on your content. So whilst the holdback period might have ended, they have an additional 12 months first look period before you are, as a producer, free to exploit those format rights without any further obligation to all four under your commissioning terms. That's really just a flavour of what to expect. It's by no means comprehensive, and it does, and there are points that can be negotiated, and also it often depends on the content, the format, and whose format it is, etc., that can create variations to those terms. But my intention was just to give you an indication of what to look out for, and to best maximise your ability to exploit and maximise your further profits in respect to the content you produce. So I think I'm going to hand back now to Nick to take you on to the next slide. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was great. So I'm going to talk to you guys now a little bit about co-developing when you're co-developing with other individuals and companies, and also the scenario of when you're being commissioned by a platform or commissioner who's asking you to assign all of the rights in the programming to them. So firstly, looking at co-developments. So as Sarah rightly pointed out, we do see it quite often that people come to us for help with the commissioning paperwork, but they haven't actually sorted out the arrangements for the underlying development work and the format that they've been co-developing with someone. And our advice is always that if possible, you wouldn't wait till the commission stage to agree on all those points. It's actually really beneficial to both of you if you can have a short heads of terms agreement, or at worst, a kind of list of agreed bullet points on email between you, which can actually amount to a contract as long as you're both in agreement on those main points. So we're also often asked, is there a difference if someone brings you a top line idea as opposed to a fully fleshed out format? So I'll address some of that as well. So the main elements that you need to decide on between you is how you're going to own the copyright in the development work, and if there's a format, the format that you're co-developing together. Also, how you're going to share net revenues, how you're going to share the production fee, what your respective roles will be on the production, what lines in the budget you'll each take. So all of those conversations should be had at the point that you are co-developing the program. And then in terms of, does it make a difference if it's a top line idea as opposed to someone bringing you a kind of fully fleshed out program format or research and development? It does make a difference, but it also depends on what roles you're both taking in terms of further development and also production of the program. So, I mean, there's so many iterations, so I'm just going to focus on a couple for you. But for example, if someone brings you an undeveloped top line idea, so literally just a few paragraphs of an idea for a program, and you're the party that needs to spend the money developing it at your own cost, then arguably you are going to be creating the bulk of the IP, and you are also fully funding that process. And so it wouldn't be unreasonable in those circumstances for you to retain 100% of the copyright in all of the work, and either pay the individual on a work for hire basis, or if you are feeling generous and depending on how much they have brought to you, you can cut them into some of the production fee, or some of the net revenues, or a bit of both. If they are going to be involved in the production process and they are going to be involved in the further development process, and you're doing that together at your own respective cost, then a co-production relationship is appropriate. And that means that you're going to share the IP, you're going to share the production fee, and you're going to share the revenues. So the general rule is that if you're co-developing, if both parties are co-developing at their own respective cost, and they're both having an active equal role on the production, then you would split the copyright, the revenues, and the production fee on a 50-50 true co-production basis. An exception to that might be if someone had brought you, say, a fully worked up entertainment format with talent attached, or they'd spent a lot of time and effort securing access rights for a doc, for example, then you might agree that they can retain a higher share of copyright if they're also going to be involved in the production. There are also lots of deviations from the rule about revenues and production fee splits matching the copyright share. So for example, if someone does bring you a fully fleshed out entertainment format and you don't really need to do any further work on it, but you're going to be the sole producer of the actual program, then it's completely possible that they can retain majority copyright on the format, but you can retain majority copyright on the finished program, because those are two separate things. And then, you know, if you're retaining majority copyright on the program, then usually, you know, your revenues and production fee split would follow. But again, there are variations to that depending on what you're both doing on the production. So yeah, we always advise it's really good to kind of chat to each other about all these different points and document them together before you go off and pitch to get your program commissioned. So moving on to what can you ask for to strengthen your position if you are faced with a commissioning agreement that's asking you to assign everything and everything, amen. It kind of depends on the nature of the program, the commissioning platform, what your negotiation strength is. But in all cases, you know, as the old adage goes, we say, if you don't ask, you don't get. So we always encourage clients to ask away and see how far you get. It's in general, your negotiation strength is going to be higher if you have developed something before commission. If a broadcaster is paying you development fees to develop prior to commission, then your chances of asking for a lot of these things are quite narrow, because their argument will just be, well, we've paid you to do all of that, so no. But obviously everyone's in a different position. You know, sometimes you can't self-fund development work, but it's really worth thinking about that. So some of the commercial terms that we would recommend you ask for would be a producer lock, because obviously if a commissioner or platform is owning all the rights, they can, you know, you could be faced with a situation where you do a brilliant job of producing series 1, but they just fancy actually working with someone else on series 2, and they kick you off, and they can do and get someone else to come on and produce it. So in order to stop that happening, you would ask for what's called a producer lock. This is effectively a promise to attach you to produce all further episodes and series of the program in the future. And you could also ask for a spin-off lock if there is a kind of format to the program, and then that locks you to any spin-off programs as well. If it's a genuine US style lock, then you just need to be aware that it doesn't necessarily mean that you will produce as in-person services. So the way that a US style lock would work is that they don't have to have you actually produce the program. What they can do instead is they will promise to give you your credits on the future programs, and they will, if in a best case scenario, you would basically get paid your full production fee margin for each future episode or series. So that's kind of locks. Another thing to ask for would be potentially reserving some rights. So if you, for example, you know, are bringing, let's have a think, or, you know, if you've got proven track record of exploiting merch rights, for example, or stage rights and radio rights, then those are your things, and you can show that you're really good at doing that, then you could argue that you want to reserve those rights and exploit them yourselves. And you can obviously cut them into a share of the net revenues in order to encourage them to agree to that. If you think that there's a really, say that it's a documentary, but you think there's a really good chance that you could also turn this into a brilliant drama production, and you wanted to reserve rights for that, then you could also argue to reserve those rights. I think, it will depend on if you have been paid again to develop the program, because asking for that type of provision won't go down very well if they have basically paid you to develop the whole thing. But you can try. Another thing to ask for is obviously a share of revenues. So if they are a platform that does share revenues, because some just don't, as a flat kind of response, but if they are, then we would encourage you to argue for a share of net revenues as well. You can sometimes negotiate something called a reversion of rights as well. So if you know that you're really keen on exploiting merch and ancillary rights, and you really don't think that even though they're asking for them, they're going to use them, you could have a clause in the contract that says, if you don't exploit these rights within X period of time, then those rights come back to us, the producer, and we can go off and exploit those rights. And it's also worth remembering to ask for reimbursement of your development costs in the program budget if you have spent a lot developing prior to commission. Okay, so I think that concludes that section. And next I'm going to talk to you a little bit about commissions from brands, directly from brands or their agencies. So branded content and how, the different things that you can think about in your conversations with the brands and the agencies. And then I will pass on to Henriette, and she's going to talk to you about some music related issues. Okay, so generally with brands and their agencies, the two positions that are going to be open to you are either the brand wants to fully own the content, or the brand is open to being granted a license of specific rights in the content. So we see really different things, and it does depend on the brands, but some of them think that because they're paying for it, that it's completely reasonable that they should own everything. And others are completely used to and open to being granted a license of rights. So our recommendation is always to start out those conversations with the assumption that you are going to be granting a license of rights to the client, and see how that goes down. So in the circumstances that they won't entertain that and they want to own the content, then the type of things that you want to be thinking about are, is can you negotiate a higher fee on the basis that, they're asking for a buyout? So your argument would be, well, if we granted you a license, then, it's going to not be as expensive, but actually because you want to own all the rights, it's going to be a bit more expensive. Then, is there a format to the program? So if there is, then try to argue that you want to retain ownership of the underlying format. And then what you would do is agree with the brand that they would have a certain holdback period where you're not allowed to create any similar programs based on the format, which gives them exclusivity over that program and the format for a period of time. Again, you'd want to ask for locks, which we've just talked about, to make sure that if there's any kind of follow-ups that they're interested in, that you can be the designated producer for those. You can also ask for a net revenue share from the brand's exploitation. And, it is still possible, even if you are giving them ownership of the copyright, it's still possible to limit their usage rights, and that's quite important to remember. So you can still have a provision in the contract that says, you own it, but if you want to use it beyond X, Y, and Z usage, then you need to come back to us and pay an uplift fee, or there might be a mechanism for paying the uplift fee in the contract as well. So if you're granting a license to the client, the discussion will be along the lines of, well, how long is their campaign period? How long do they actually need to license the content for? Which platforms do they want? Which platforms and websites do they want it for? Do they want it for any kind of point of sale, any extra usage that you might be able to charge extra for? Again, what is the holdback? Well, actually, the holdback will be a bit less relevant, because actually after their exclusive license period, that is effectively your holdback. You can exploit the content after that period of time. And the net revenue shares will be, they may want, you don't have to offer it up, but they may well ask you for a revenue share from your exploitation of the content. And obviously it really does center around the editorial of the content, because sometimes you're producing something that is completely associated with that brand and it just wouldn't make sense to have it anywhere else, in which case, you may as well let them have the copyright in it, but just ask for those things that we've talked about. But quite often, branded content is genuinely, editorially more generic and could sell quite well and be exploited. Okay, and then yes, I think we had, just one last thing on branded content. Just as a generic point to note is that you might sometimes see some really weird contracts coming across from brands in particular, because they're used to, it kind of comes out of their procurement teams and it looks like a sort of goods and services type agreement that just doesn't have anything to do with content. And that happens a lot, and it's really time consuming and costly for the client to try and turn those contracts into something that works for content delivery. So if you are faced with that situation, have a think about whether they'd be open to receiving from you a kind of short branded content commissioning agreement. We've done that for quite a lot of clients, and it just sets out in very basic terms, what the clearances are, what you're delivering, the budget, and so on, in a really simple way, and that can kind of cut through some of those problems. So a question we had in advance was about revenue shares being payable to you from another party. So you've co-produced something together, and effectively this person wanted to know, how do you make sure you're going to continue receiving that share of revenue? Well, the way that you would normally do it is that in your co-production agreement, or if you've just got a heads of terms, you would have a payment clause, a net revenues clause. So you'd have your definition of net revenues, which would basically say anything that they receive from exploitation of the program. So if they're fully responsible for exploiting the program and the revenues are coming into them, they agree to pay you those net revenues, usually on a quarterly basis, for as long as those revenues are being received by that company. And you should also have in that clause that they will report to you at the same time. So every quarter you're getting a report showing how much they've received, and then you guys just invoice for it every quarter. And that's for as long as they receive revenues, basically. So yeah, all right. Well, I think that's me done. I'm going to hand you over to Henriette now, and this will be our last slide, and then we will hand over to you guys to ask us any burning questions.
Thank you, Nicola. Hi, I'm Henriette, and I'm here to talk about music clearance for TV. So the most important thing to note is that in a piece of recorded music, there are two copyrights. There's the publishing copyright, which is the copyright in the underlying musical composition in a recorded piece of music. And then there's the master copyright, which is the copyright in the actual specific recording of that musical composition. So generally, music publishers or songwriters own the publishing copyright, and record companies or artists own the master copyright. You may have heard of PRS and PPL. They're both collection societies. PRS actually consists both of MCPS and PRS. And these collection societies represent, grant licenses and collect royalties for their members. Most, if not all, music publishers and songwriters in the UK will be members of PRS, and most, if not all, record companies and artists will be members of PPL. In terms of your options for using music in a program, you can use commercial music, library music, public domain music, or you can commission music yourself. Focusing first on commercial music. The BBC and commercial TV stations such as ITV, Sky, and other broadcasters have blanket agreements with PRS for music and PPL, allowing the use of songs and recordings which are part of PRS's and PPL's repertoire without the need to obtain individual licenses from each copyright owner. So you basically need to be checking out with a relevant broadcaster what terms and conditions apply. For example, BBC's blanket agreements may be used if the BBC have commissioned the programme and funded more than 10% of the production budget. PRS and PPL's repertoires include the majority of commercial music and masters, although some of the music is specifically excluded from PRS's blankets, such as music by The Doors, some Michael Jackson catalogue, and there are restrictions on recordings by the Beatles and John Lennon for use in BBC public services. There are also several other exclusions from blanket agreements, such as the use of unauthorized adaptations of musical works, music for ballet, opera, musicals, and opening and closing credits music. Also, you need to remember that there are restrictions on the use of music in programs exploited outside the UK, unless you've obtained worldwide clearance from the relevant rights owners beforehand. So in terms of the other alternatives, you could use library music, which is essentially where you license music for a one-off fee, and you get a library music license, which will include both publishing and master clearance. And normally using library music is probably the safest, most affordable and easiest option. You could also use public domain music, which is music in which the owner's rights have expired, so you don't have to pay for using it. And normally this involves using classical and traditional music. Alternatively, you can commission specially composed original music. So to do so, you would engage a composer or songwriter either to create music on a full copyright or work for hire basis, meaning that you will own the music and masters and that you can use them as you see fit, including in your TV program, but you can also exploit the music elsewhere. Or you could buy it from them using a license, meaning that you're licensing the publishing copyright and master copyright for the program only, but the composer retains ownership of the copyright and can then exploit it elsewhere. In a composer agreement, you would pay either a package fee, which includes the cost of creating and recording the music, or a creative fee plus recording costs. If the composer is a member of the PRS, the relevant broadcaster would also need to pay performance royalties to the PRS for the streaming or downloading of the music, and the PRS would then account to the composer. This will probably fall under the broadcaster's blanket agreement with PRS. And if the composer is not a PRS member and not a member of any other performing rights society and has agreed to assign both the music copyright and the master copyright, you can do a full buyout of all rights, meaning that there would be nothing further to pay by any party. However, some composers, particularly those who have representation, may only agree to a full assignment of rights on the basis of a 50% music publishing royalty for any uses of the music outside of the TV program, as well as a record royalty if there was a separate use of the master outside the program. If you're using a license contract with the composer will retain ownership of the publishing and master copyright, but will agree for you to use the music and master in the TV program only for a specific fee. Again, whether or not the broadcaster will need to pay PRS will depend on whether or not the composer is a member of PRS, but most composers and songwriters are members. If you use a license, you may want to ask for a period of exclusivity over the specially composed music or limit other uses to non-TV program exploitation so that your music is more exclusive. And moving on to contracting musician performers for TV. So if you want to engage musicians to perform music for a TV program, for example, either because you want to re-record an existing song to avoid having to clear the master side with a record company, or you want to hire a musician to record specially composed music, you need to check if the musician is a member of the musicians union. And if he or she is, you would need to engage the musician under either the BBC Musicians Union Agreement or the Musicians Union Pact Agreement, depending on whether the production is an in-house BBC production or an independent production. The agreement between BBC and the Musicians Union applies to in-house BBC productions and sets out certain minimum terms and conditions for engaging session musicians for BBC TV, including rates of pay. This agreement basically covers terms and rates for live sessions and the broadcasting of BBC events, etc. Musicians engaged to record specially composed music and reuse of existing performance footage. PACT, which stands for the Producers Alliance for Cinema and Television Limited. So the PACT and the Musician Union Agreement applies both to content produced by independent TV and film production companies, which include those producing content for all broadcasters, including the BBC, and sets out minimum terms and conditions for engaging session musicians covering TV broadcasts, cinematic release, online use, musicians engaged to record specially composed music, such as jingles, title music or incidental music, and the reuse of existing performance footage. A musician's performance that has been cleared under the combined use fee, which is the broadest type of clearance, will mean that all rights for the particular program have been bought out, but not any other uses, i.e. if the performance is used in a subsequent or other program, then a further reuse fee would be payable. Non-musician union musicians, if a musician is not an MU member, you can engage them on a full buyout basis, which means that you can clear and buy out all rights in the performance throughout the world in perpetuity for a fixed fee. To do this, you would need to ask the musician to sign a musician performer release. This means that you can now use the musician's performance as you see fit in any and all media without further payment or consent from the musician. And that's me on my part.
Thanks, Henriette. That's great. So yes, we are now at the lovely Q&A section. So we'd love to hear from you if you've got any thoughts about that or other questions that have cropped up. Just fire away.
Please feel free to put your questions either in the chat function, or if you want, just do a show of hands so we can see if anybody's got a question. Does anything that all make sense? Did anything have any? Did it bring up anything for anybody? Is there any questions? And if there's no questions, I will start just calling on people.
I've also put my details up in case anyone wants to ask anything afterwards. That's totally fine.
Definitely. Do we have any questions? Vanessa, sorry, darling, you're one of the first people I can see on my screen. Do you have any thoughts or any questions that have come up for you from that session?
Not as yet. Just like letting it marinate. It was very, very helpful.
Yeah, there was lots of information, wasn't there? There was a hell of a lot of information, and things that I didn't even know or consider. Do you know what I mean?
Can I ask a question? Who do you speak to about co-production deals? I mean, who should it be in the chain? Because you end up often speaking to a development producer, but who is it you should be speaking to in terms of the business unit?
I see what you mean. So I guess it needs to be someone senior, doesn't it? So it's going to be the head of production, or it's going to be the production exec, or it's going to be the MD, depending on how that company runs itself and who's doing the commercial negotiations on deals.
And is it that if you come up with an idea, say it's a one-liner and there's interest with another production company, at what point do you then start the conversation about, well, we'd like to develop this so that we've got ownership and so on of the idea?
I think once you've pitched it and they're interested, straight away, yeah. Okay.
And where do you come in, Nicola? Where do you guys come in to sort of help?
Yeah, so we come in as early as you like, and preferably the earlier the better. So if you were saying to us, we've pitched this idea to this company, we're going to co-develop it with this company is going to do X, Y, and Z, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, that's when we'd say to you, okay, well, given that kind of mix of how everything's working, we'd recommend that you share the copyright X, Y, and Z, share the revenues like this, share the production fee like this. That's when we would give our recommendations.
You draw up the agreements, do you? Is that?
And then we can help you draw up kind of heads of terms, or even just if you want to agree stuff on email first, we can help you with that.
And then down the line, what do you I'm sure everybody would be interested anyway to sort of know what you can do in terms of just assisting somebody.
Yeah, sure. Well, we basically cover everything from development through to production through to exploitation. So any kind of clearances, contracts, certain kind of policies, depending on, you know, working policies. So anything across the production in terms of legal and business affairs, we can help you with. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
And also to know that we have a relationship with Mint as well. So there is a discount that can be offered if you guys need to use any of their services, which is also really helpful as well. So they've worked with a few of our Channel 4 companies, and they've advised other people. So they're a really great company. We've got quite a good relationship with them. Has anybody else got any more thoughts? Emil, as a commissioner, you just started as a commissioning job, is that right? Yeah.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. For you, how interesting was there? Anything that came up for you when being on the kind of other side of the kind of broadcaster side rather than as the producer?
Well, it's just really interesting for me to listen to this at the moment, because I was never involved in development in my production career. I'd always taken series on when they had been green lit. So I'm actually just fully learning about this from both sides at the moment. We have a legal and business affairs sort of unit here, and our kind of terms and conditions basically is, if you don't meet the terms and conditions, then we can't move forward with the show. And we have different terms and conditions compared to the BBC, for example. So it is really interesting to hear from it, hear from the other side. I apologise, I joined a little bit late, and because I had a meeting, unfortunately. But I'm definitely going to be watching the whole thing back, because it really interests me.
Yeah, no problem. No, and that's fine. We appreciate that everybody's busy. Dwayne, are you still with us? Have you gone? Is Dwayne still with us? I know Dwayne said he had a meeting. I remember he's another commissioner at the BBC. And again, he was saying prior that for him being on the other side, just listening to some of the terms, because you just end up commissioning the program and not knowing, you're not getting involved with anything else. So I just wanted to see, he looks like he might have popped off, because I know a lot of guys are working and kind of in and out of meetings. Is there anything else that...
Yes, Simone, it's Bernard. I've frozen, but I'm here.
Okay, sir.
So, hi, Nicola.
Hi, Bernard. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. And thank you for all your help. Nicola's been helping our production company with our stuff as well. So I think for us, the biggest learning was when we sit down to talk, because it comes down to money, and you know, this is really what it's about. When we sit down and we talk about how much there is the production fee and splits and shares of the production fee, and then future revenues, rather than, you know, the program's got to be made, so there's got to be money to make the program. Then there's a production fee, which is what people are fighting about. And then there's the possibility of future revenues. And for us, it was working out, you know, how we, as much as we like people and we're great and we want to work with people, if the money isn't available in the production fee, you can't offer it. Because as a business, great as you want to work with Brian, who's come up with a great idea, and you've known Brian for 15 years, and you know, you think it's worth, you know, £3,000 to Brian, you've only got, you know, a £2,000 production fee. So that money's got to come from somewhere, and you've got to be realistic to what's available in the production fee. So for us, it was really starting to think really strategically and clearly about all the relationships you have has got to be based on what's available within the budget of the program. Which also means when you read the headline which says BBC has given someone, you know, $500,000 to make a program, you know, development is probably not going to be half of that, because the program itself has got to be made.
Yes. No, they're all really good points, Bernard. And I think, you know, I think you're right. Like, the production fee is your margin on the program, and you want to keep it that way. But if you are co-developing with someone, and, you know, as I was saying earlier, it kind of depends how much input and involvement and cost of theirs they've had when they bring you an idea and when you co-develop it. So if they had actually spent quite a lot more than you're going to spend, then it might be appropriate. But, you know, if you can also try and claim some of that back in the commissioning budget somehow, then that's ideal, isn't it?
So usually what happens is you go to a commissioner and the commissioner says, could you go back because here are some notes that I have for you. How does that play? Does that mean you still own fully the rights to that, or can the commissioner now say, well, the idea you came to me wasn't developed in the way that we wanted it to be. Now you have developed something that's right for us, so we can take a...
Yeah, I think it really varies between commissioners, actually. So I've never known BBC or Channel 4 to play that card, but I have known Sky to do that. Sarah, how about you? What have you experienced on that front? I think, you know, it's different with Sky anyway, because they ask for an assignment of the rights and they grant you back a license of the distribution rights. So it's easier for non-terms of trade broadcasters to take that approach. I've not known a terms of trade broadcaster to take that approach.
I agree. I haven't seen your terms of trade broadcaster try that. Only with Sky have I seen them try and negotiate a share of the format if they feel they've inputted at it during development or at development stage, and trying to co-own it with the producer, or even own it in its entirety.
Bernard, can I just check? Are you saying if you go back and you implement the commissioner's notes, are you worried that a commissioner would take a certain ownership in some manner or another of your project, as it were?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So how I sort of see it is, I'm working for this channel, so that's part of my job. And then once you are working for a channel as staff, that part of your job is we don't have any ownership over it, if you see what I mean. Much like if you developed a project for a company, the company would own it. Yeah, so yeah. I'm helping. So if I was to be working with you, for example, that would be your idea, and whatever my input was on that, and I have been putting on quite a large element into some recent pitches, I would still consider that yours because you brought me the idea, if you get what I mean. And I'm working for this company, so I wouldn't really be able to stake out any ownership to it, if you get what I mean. This would be that put the commissioner at the end of it.
This is when you approach them as an independent.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. If you approach me and we developed it together, you would be able to take that project elsewhere without my, and take that element of development that we've done together as your own, I think, personally.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that's obviously how it works with you guys at UKTV. Like we said, we've only seen it with Sky, so I don't think it's a regular occurrence.
It would have to be quite a significant addition to the format to create a new proprietary right that the commissioner could then assert an ownership share. And I think if it happened lots, it would scare a lot of producers off to a lot of the commissioners, because you'd be too worried about sharing your ideas with them. So it's something that I haven't seen very often at all.
What we are seeing more of there actually is, if you're kind of newbie to the scene, that commissioners are frequently asking you to team up with someone else as a co-production partner. And yeah, that's like, obviously then you're in a situation where you are going to be sharing your IP, probably.
Yeah, we would probably do that. The reason for that being is that for new companies, and as Anne Mensah said a little while ago, new companies might not have the infrastructure and the track record to actually prove that they've, to prove the investment, as it were, that we would be putting into it. So when we do like a kind of an investment portfolio to find out, when we get interrogated on the money, etc., and if we're putting forward a production company that has no track record, the likelihood is it will fail at this stage. So it's better in that respect to co-pro, or put the person, when you've got these small companies, to put them with a company, a good match that has a track record, so that they can get that series away.
Can I ask something there? That's really interesting, because what we found with some of the companies, particularly on the accelerator, some of the smaller companies that they were asked to go in a co-pro, how do you kind of, so I definitely for the broadcaster, you understand that it just kind of gives you some kind of advice that the program will be produced at a standard and things won't go wrong. But for the producer who's come up with the idea, how do they protect and kind of, you know, how do they can protect what they're, and a lot of them feel a bit aggrieved. Actually, generally it's their idea, they've come up with the idea, they've worked on it, and then you're brought it to the production, you know, broadcast, and then they're being told to co-pro. So what can producers do, or those smaller production companies do, to kind of get the best deal? Because I'm hearing, and it might not be true, but people are often, they get to work with this big production company, they get paid 2 pence, and then they get kind of like an AP credit, and feels like they weren't part of that process. And it doesn't help when they go again to kind of pitch something to that same broadcaster in their relationship, because they haven't proven that they're able to produce. So any thoughts or ideas around that?
Yeah, definitely. We have represented quite a few clients in that scenario who've been really keen to ensure that they are protecting their rights in that scenario, because they're the ones that have come up with they've, you know, worked up the development, they've come up with the creative, and they're understandably a bit nervous about being asked to team up with someone and how that's going to affect their rights. So we have advice on that quite a bit, and it kind of goes back a lot to what I was saying before. You know, it's a discussion between the parties about who's doing what on the next phase of development, who's going to be having creative input, what does that final developed program look like in terms of each party's contributions, and then also what are the roles of the two production companies going to be on the production. So what are they physically doing on the production? Who's providing the insurance, the legal, if there is legal, who's on the hook for delivery, who's taking that risk, you know, all of those things, and you know, which party also has got more strength or kind of maybe commercial nous to go off and distribute the program and get some good distribution deals. So all of those things would be kind of discussed between them at that stage, and that's when we would say protect yourselves with a kind of co-production heads of terms agreement, which is basically going to set out how you're going to co-own the copyright in the development work and the program, and what your split of production fee and revenues will be, and who's going to basically deliver to the broadcaster, and who's going to have the distribution rights as well. And that just all needs thrashing out with our support, really, or whoever's support you're going to work with. I
think the other thing about that to raise in there is that, so you're coming with an idea, right? Now, if you don't have the means to produce it, if you get involved in a situation where you don't have the means to produce it, immediately costs can soar, and you can potentially lose out, you know, the liabilities on that production company if it's one person or if it's, you know, Fremantle. So pairing with a production company can help in a lot of ways and provide an insurance blanket when you're especially when you're starting out and you don't have that infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and also, you know, it can be really useful for just, you know, plugging into a larger production company's, you know, finance team and their whole structure of, you know, having a head of production and all of that support as well. So it does really work. We've seen it really work. I think the important thing is that the person the party who's come up with the creative just has a means of making sure that that's recognized in terms of, you know, how they share the copyright in the finished program. And
yeah, I think you have to go on. Sorry,
just to go back into, just to give an example about protecting format from the original producer or the original idea, a producer who came up with the idea. I worked on a co-production between an entertainment producer who had an entertainment format, and they had the idea of taking this entertainment format on a effectively world travel series. And whilst they had experience at producing entertainment studio type shows, they didn't have experience of taking these shows around the world. So they attached them to a producer who was experienced with travel logs, those kind of productions. And what happened was that they agreed that whilst the format in itself sat with the original producer, they agreed that should they ever produce a further travel log series based on that format, that second producer would be attached. So what the travel producer brought to the program, they wouldn't lose in respect to further travel versions of that show. But whilst the entertainment format itself sat with the original producer, they could still work in the field and continue to produce programs off that original format. So both parties kind of retained the interest in an ongoing interest in the elements they brought to that particular co-production, and that was all set out in the co-production agreement between the two parties. And again, it worked well, and people felt that they were taking away what they put in to that particular relationship. But again, that was something that Channel 4 insisted on, bringing those two parties together to bring their different skill sets.
Yeah, so because I think oftentimes a lot of producers or smaller production companies feel that don't always see the benefit of co-proing. So it's really good to hear that the benefits and, you know, and obviously how you navigate through them to ensure that you're getting a good deal or the questions right asked up front. And it's been
if that new producer has their name on the commissioning agreement, because once your name's on that commissioning agreement, you become part of their systems. So you know your details are there, and so you become part of the wider network of producers that those companies work for. So that's quite a good thing to ensure that your name's on the commissioning agreement, even if it's if there's co-production agreement, that so you have that recognition within the broadcasters systems and network and stuff.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Is there anybody got any more thoughts before we kind of wrap up? I know someone asked if you could share the PowerPoint. I don't know whether that's still needed, but are you happy, Nicholas, if we shared the PowerPoint? Because there were just a few questions that
were absolutely. Yeah. So shall I just email it to you? And
if you email it to me, then I'll forward on to others. Before we kind of say goodbye to Nicola and the team, has anybody else got any other thoughts or questions? It was a lot to take in. See, the most important question, you're going to make me laugh. Question that's been asked twice. Oh, great session. Right, yeah, lawyer. Right, yeah, insightful. People are just saying that it was a really great session. The T-shirt, I've been asked twice because it's really important. I'll put the details up on WhatsApp where you guys can get a T-shirt. We'll get some of those sorted out for you guys soon. It was so informative, and actually, it's really interesting for me. I started my career as a development producer and often tried to pitch ideas to people, and we're really frustrated when they wouldn't want to pay me anything. But now listening to you guys completely understand why, and even listening to Bernard in terms of like if there's no money in the production fee, that there's a reluctance. So you send someone a top line and then think that they should give you half of the production fee, and then get really offended when they won't, even though you just based it on a sentence. So that's been really, even just for me, has been really interesting, and even been able to give people some basic advice as they navigate or as they kind of connect with commissioners. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions. Fantastic. Thank you guys so much for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
If there are any specific questions, because I know that sometimes in this space, there are questions that people really want to, it's really specific to the project that we're working on. Are you happy for people to email you direct, to email us, and then we put you in touch with them?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love that. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So guys, if there are questions that you felt weren't quite right to ask in an open forum and they were more specific to a project that you were doing, let us know, and then we'll forward those questions on. And I think we've got contact details that we'll forward to you guys, so you guys can contact Nicola and team as you want. All right, well, thank you so much. We're gonna end early. I'm gonna stick around for 5 or 10 minutes if anyone wants to talk to me, but if not, fantastic. And we shall see you, I think. Ria, remind us, is it Friday? We've got Kate Townsend from Netflix, am I right?
Friday.
Yeah, and what time is that?
I think that's at 1:30.
The lunchtime session, guys. Yeah, Kate Townsend from Netflix. She looks after their factual programming. That should be a great session. I know a lot of you guys want to do like feature docs for Netflix and stuff like that. So it'd be a good one to get some advice and talk to. But thank you all so much. Like I said, I'm going to stick around for 5 minutes. Love, thank you, Nicola. I'll be in touch soon. Thanks so much.
Bye. Bye.
Lots of love. Bye-bye.
Thanks.